No one noticed anything wrong at first, and that was the most disturbing part of all. The night was quiet in the way American highways often are after midnight, when traffic thins out and the world feels paused between one day and the next. The interstate stretched endlessly in both directions, illuminated only by occasional streetlights and the glow of distant exits. That night, a man named Daniel Carter was driving home alone, unaware that his life was about to fracture into something no one would ever fully understand. Daniel was 39 years old, a civil engineer who worked long hours and lived an uneventful life in a suburb outside Phoenix, Arizona. He wasn't reckless, he wasn't impulsive, and he wasn't hiding from anyone. Friends described him as practical to the point of boredom. He followed routines, paid his bills early, and avoided unnecessary risks. He had recently finalized a divorce, but it had been amicable, quiet, and free of drama. If anything, Daniel seemed relieved, focused on rebuilding his life with calm intention. There was nothing about him that suggested he would become the center of a mystery that would haunt investigators for years. On the night everything went wrong, Daniel had stayed late at the office to finish reviewing blueprints for a commercial project. At 11:47 p.m., he sent an email to a coworker confirming revisions for the next morning. At 11:52 p.m., he left the building and walked to his car. Surveillance cameras in the parking garage showed him unlocking his vehicle, placing his laptop bag in the passenger seat, and pulling out calmly. There was no hesitation, no unusual behavior. He drove the same route he always took, merging onto the interstate and heading west toward home at 12:13 a.m. Daniel made a phone call to his sister. The call lasted 1 minute and 32 seconds. He told her he was tired, that he'd talked to her over the weekend, and that he was almost home. His voice was normal, relaxed. He ended the call with a casual goodbye. That phone call would later be analyzed, replayed, and dissected endlessly, but nothing about it stood out. It was painfully ordinary. Approximately 7 minutes later, Daniel's car exited the highway at a small, rarely used off-ramp. This exit led to an older service road that paralleled the interstate, passing through a stretch of desert dotted with abandoned structures and closed businesses. Daniel had taken this exit countless times before. It shaved a few minutes off his commute and avoided late-night highway construction. It was familiar territory to 12:24 a.m. A traffic camera captured Daniel's vehicle driving past an intersection on the service road. The footage was grainy but clear enough to identify the car. Headlights on. Speed steady. No signs of trouble. This was the last confirmed image of Daniel Carter alive at 6:18 a.m. A county road maintenance worker noticed something unusual while driving his assigned route. A dark sedan was parked on the shoulder of the service road, hazard lights blinking faintly in the growing morning light. The vehicle was positioned neatly, pulled completely off the road, as if the driver had stopped intentionally. Concerned that someone might be in trouble, the worker pulled over and approached the car. The driver's door was open. The engine was off. There was no one inside. The man immediately noticed something unsettling. The car looked untouched. No broken windows. No signs of damage. No skid marks or debris on the road. Inside the vehicle, personal items were clearly visible. A laptop bag sat on the passenger seat. A wallet rested in the center console. A cell phone lay face down near the cup holder. Everything appeared normal, except for the absence of the driver. Police were called, and officers arrived within minutes. They secured the area and began documenting the scene. The vehicle was registered to Daniel Carter. His ID confirmed it. His phone was unlocked, displaying a missed notification from a navigation app, as if the trip had been interrupted suddenly. There was no blood, no evidence of violence, no footprints leading away from the car, despite the dusty desert ground surrounding it. The most confusing detail was the placement of the vehicle. Daniel hadn't swerved or crashed. He hadn't stopped abruptly. He had pulled over carefully, hazard lights on, like someone responding to a minor issue or planning to step out briefly. But there was no flat tire, no mechanical failure, nothing that explained why he would stop in such a remote area at that hour. Search teams were deployed immediately. Officers canvassed the surrounding desert, scanning the terrain for any sign of Daniel. Helicopters flew overhead. K-9 units arrived and picked up his scent at the open driver's door. The dogs followed it for less than 50 feet before stopping completely. The scent didn't fade naturally. It ended abruptly, as if Daniel had vanished from the surface of the earth. As the sun rose higher, the scene grew more unsettling. The desert offered no cover, no hiding places, no logical explanation. If Daniel had walked away, someone should have seen him. If he had been taken, there should have been signs of a struggle. There were none. By noon, the case had escalated. Detectives took over, and the area was expanded for a wider search. Nearby businesses were checked, though most had been abandoned for years. Surveillance cameras along the service road were reviewed. One camera, mounted on a closed warehouse, captured Daniel's car slowing down, signaling, and pulling onto the shoulder. The hazard lights activated. The driver's door opened. Then the camera showed nothing else. Daniel did not walk into frame. He did not move toward the desert. He did not approach the road. The doors simply opened, and the driver was never seen again. Investigators replayed the footage repeatedly, unable to explain the gap. There was no camera malfunction, no missing frames. The timestamp was intact. The desert wind moved small debris across the road, proving the footage was continuous. Daniel Carter had opened his door and disappeared without being captured on camera. By evening, Daniel's disappearance had reached local news outlets. Reporters described it as baffling, but authorities remained cautious. They suggested Daniel may have experienced a medical emergency or become disoriented. But privately, many admitted the case didn't fit any pattern they recognized. That night, as the desert cooled and darkness returned, officers stood near the abandoned car, looking out across the empty landscape. There were no answers, only questions that felt heavier with every passing hour. Daniel Carter had not crashed. He had not called for help. He had not left behind a note. He had simply stopped, opened his door, and vanished into a place where disappearing should have been impossible. And this was only the beginning. By the second day, the desert had already erased whatever fragile hope investigators still held. Heat rose off the sand in wavering sheets, and the ground hardened under the sun, making it even less likely that any usable evidence would be found. The abandoned sedan remained parked on the shoulder of the service road, now surrounded by police tape and marked vehicles. From a distance, it looked ordinary, almost peaceful, but those standing close to it could feel that something was profoundly wrong. Detectives began reconstructing Daniel Carter's final movements minute by minute. His phone records showed no outgoing calls after the short conversation with his sister. There were no distress messages, no emergency calls, no unusual app activity. His navigation app showed the route home, abruptly ending at the exact location where the car was found. The phone battery was still at 70%. It hadn't been damaged. It hadn't been shut off. It had simply stopped moving. Inside the vehicle, everything felt deliberate. The laptop bag was zipped closed and positioned neatly on the seat. The wallet still contained cash and credit cards. The keys were missing, but that wasn't unusual if Daniel had stepped out of the car intentionally. What unsettled detectives most was the lack of chaos. People in distress leave traces behind. Panic leaves fingerprints. Fear creates mistakes. None of that existed here. The camera footage from the closed warehouse became the centerpiece of the investigation. Technicians enhanced the video, adjusted contrast levels, and examined it frame by frame. Daniel's car slowed, signaled, and pulled over smoothly. The hazard lights began flashing at a steady rhythm. The driver's door opened. Then nothing. No movement. No figure stepping out. No shadow shifting on the ground. The open door remained visible for several seconds before the camera's angle made it disappear from view as the car settled slightly. One technician paused the footage and said quietly that it looked wrong. Not broken, not corrupted, just wrong. The desert debris moved naturally. Light levels remained consistent. Time flowed forward. But the most important action, the moment when Daniel should have stepped into view, never occurred. Nine handlers returned to the scene for a second attempt. Fresh dogs were brought in, each trained for different scent patterns. Once again, the dogs tracked Daniel's scent from the driver's seat to the open door, then a few steps outward, and then nothing. They circled, confused, whining softly, noses pressed to the ground as if searching for something that should have been there but wasn't. Search teams expanded the perimeter, pushing farther into the desert than before. They found animal tracks, old tire marks, and the remains of abandoned campsites, but nothing connected to Daniel. No footprints matching his shoes. No signs of a fall. No disturbed brush. If he had walked away, even briefly, the ground should have recorded it. It hadn't. As investigators worked, Daniel's family arrived. His sister stood near the taped-off area, staring at the car in disbelief. She kept asking the same question, quietly at first, then with growing desperation. Why would he stop here? Why would he open the door? No one had an answer. Daniel knew this road. He knew the area. There was nothing nearby that would have required him to pull over. By the third day, theories began circulating within the department. A medical emergency was discussed, but it failed under scrutiny. If Daniel had collapsed, his body should have been nearby. Exposure was another possibility, but again, there was no body, and the timeline didn't support it. Abduction was considered, but there were no skid marks, no signs of a struggle, and no witness reports of another vehicle. The desert offered too much visibility for something like that to happen unnoticed. Then there was the theory no one wanted to say out loud, that Daniel hadn't left the scene in any way that could be tracked. Late on the fourth night, a patrol officer stationed near the car reported something unusual. He claimed he heard a brief sound coming from the desert, not an animal, not wind, but something mechanical. A low, humming vibration that lasted only a few seconds before stopping. When others arrived, the sound was gone. No source was found. The report was logged but quietly dismissed. That on the fifth day, investigators reviewed older satellite imagery of the area, looking for anything unusual. That was when they noticed something subtle. A narrow strip of land near where Daniel's car had stopped showed inconsistent patterns over time. The ground appeared slightly darker in some images, lighter in others, as if disturbed and then reset. There was no record of construction or excavation in the area. It wasn't enough to prove anything, but it added another layer of discomfort to an already impossible case. That same afternoon, a desert hiker contacted police with a strange claim. He said that 2 nights earlier, while walking several miles from the service road, he had seen a set of hazard lights blinking in the distance, far from any road. When he approached, the lights stopped suddenly, and the darkness returned. He couldn't explain how a car could have been there, and when officers checked the location, they found nothing. No tire tracks, no debris, just empty desert. By the end of the week, the case had attracted state-level attention. Analysts, behavioral experts, and missing persons specialists reviewed every detail. None could explain how a man could disappear from a stationary vehicle without leaving behind any physical evidence. Daniel Carter had not faded slowly. He had been removed cleanly, decisively, and without explanation. And then, just as the investigation began to stall, something appeared that should not have been there at all. Early one morning, an evidence technician returning to the scene noticed an object resting on the driver's seat. The car had been sealed, documented, logged. Nothing inside it had changed since the first day. Yet there it was. Daniel's keys. They were placed neatly on the seat, aligned carefully, as if someone had taken the time to make sure they were noticed. The technician froze, heart racing, before calling it in. Investigators rushed to the scene. No one could explain how the keys had gotten there. The car had not been opened. The seals were intact. No signs of forced entry existed. The discovery shattered any remaining sense of control over the case. Someone, or something, had interacted with the vehicle after Daniel disappeared. And whoever did it had done so without being seen, without leaving evidence, and without triggering alarms. That night, detectives reviewed the warehouse camera footage again, focusing not on Daniel, but on the darkness around him. They noticed something new. For less than half a second, just as the driver's door opened, the ambient light shifted. Not dramatically, not enough to notice at normal speed, but enough to register when slowed down. It was as if the space beside the car had briefly bent. By the time investigators realized what they were looking at, it was already too late to explain it. Daniel Carter had vanished into a mystery that was no longer confined to logic, and the deeper they looked, the more it felt like the desert itself was hiding something. By the time the keys were found inside the sealed vehicle, The investigation had crossed a line investigators didn't like to acknowledge. This was no longer a case that fit inside standard procedures or familiar explanations. Every new detail didn't just raise questions. It actively contradicted the rules investigators relied on to make sense of disappearances. And now, someone had clearly interfered with evidence without leaving a trace. The car was immediately impounded and transferred to a secure facility. It was examined inch by inch under controlled conditions. Forensic teams dusted every surface, swabbed every handle, and dismantled parts of the interior. No foreign fingerprints were found. No unfamiliar DNA. The seals on the doors and trunk showed no signs of tampering. The alarm system logs showed no activation. According to every measurable indicator, the vehicle had remained untouched since the moment it was first secured, and yet the keys had been placed inside. Investigators began reviewing personnel access logs, questioning every officer, technician, and contractor who had come near the vehicle. Everyone had an alibi. Everyone had been documented. No gaps were found. The facility's security cameras showed no unauthorized entry, no unexplained movements. Nothing. Privately, some detectives began to express doubts they had never voiced before. One veteran investigator admitted that he had worked missing persons cases for over 20 years and had never seen anything like this. People vanished, yes. Evidence got lost, yes. But evidence did not reappear inside sealed environments without explanation. As pressure mounted, higher authorities stepped in. A specialized task force was assembled, bringing in analysts from outside the state. Behavioral profilers reviewed Daniel's background in greater depth. They found nothing unusual. No secret contacts. No unexplained financial activity. No signs of paranoia or delusion. Daniel Carter had not been planning to disappear. If anything, he had been making plans to move forward. Attention returned to the location itself. The service road and surrounding desert were mapped again, this time with advanced ground-penetrating radar. Teams scanned the area for hidden structures, tunnels, or subsurface anomalies. Most of the scans were unremarkable: solid desert earth, rocks, and the occasional buried debris from decades-old construction. But one scan, taken roughly 20 feet from where Daniel's car had stopped, showed a brief irregularity. Not a void, not a tunnel, just a distortion, as if the density of the ground had changed and then changed back. Engineers debated the finding. Some argued it was a natural variation in soil composition. Others weren't convinced. The shape was too localized, too symmetrical. Excavation was considered, but without stronger evidence, it was delayed. Then came the audio. A technician reviewing the warehouse security footage noticed something odd while isolating background noise. When the clip was slowed down and the audio amplified, a faint sound emerged just as the driver's door opened. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was a low-frequency hum, lasting less than a second. It sounded mechanical, but it didn't match any known vehicle noise, electrical system, or environmental source. Audio specialists analyzed the sound independently. None could identify it. It didn't resemble industrial machinery, aircraft, or power equipment. One expert described it as resembling pressure equalization, like air being displaced rapidly in a confined space. But there was no confined space visible. As investigators dug deeper, reports from the surrounding area began to surface. A truck driver came forward saying he had experienced a brief loss of radio signal near the same stretch of road several nights before Daniel's disappearance. A nearby resident reported seeing strange light distortions in the distance late at night, which he had initially dismissed as heat shimmer. Another witness claimed their vehicle's engine stalled briefly while passing the area, then restarted on its own. Individually, these reports meant little. Together, they painted a picture that made officials uncomfortable. The task force requested historical data for the area. Old land records showed that the service road had been built decades earlier, cutting through what had once been an undeveloped desert basin. During construction, workers had reported unexplained equipment failures and unusual ground behavior, but no official reports were filed. The project had been completed quickly and quietly. As the investigation continued, Daniel's sister remained in constant contact with authorities. She visited the site repeatedly, standing near the shoulder of the road, staring at the empty space where her brother's car had been found. On one visit, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A faint discoloration in the ground, barely visible unless viewed from a certain angle. She pointed it out to an officer, who marked it for review. When technicians examined the spot, they found nothing physically unusual. No chemical residue, no radiation, no temperature difference. And yet, cameras placed to monitor the area began experiencing brief, unexplained glitches. Frames skipped. Timestamps jumped forward by fractions of a second. It was subtle enough that it might have gone unnoticed under other circumstances. But now, nothing felt accidental. Then, late one night, something happened that changed the tone of the investigation completely. That a security guard stationed near the impounded vehicle reported hearing a sound coming from inside the facility. When he investigated, he found the lights in one section flickering. As he approached the car, he felt a sudden pressure in his ears, followed by an intense sense of disorientation. The feeling passed quickly, lasting only a few seconds, but it left him shaken. Reviewing the facility's footage from that moment revealed something chilling. For a fraction of a second, the outline of the car appeared distorted, as if the image itself had warped. Then everything returned to normal. The incident was reported, documented, and quietly classified. Soon after, the task force received instructions to scale back public communication. Certain findings were removed from official reports. Others were labeled inconclusive. The case was still active, but it was no longer transparent. Some investigators were reassigned. Others were told not to pursue certain lines of inquiry. Behind closed doors, discussions shifted away from criminal explanations entirely. Daniel Carter had not disappeared in the traditional sense. He had not been taken, lost, or killed in any way investigators could measure. Every piece of evidence suggested something had intervened, something brief, precise, and beyond existing frameworks. And then, just when it seemed the case could not grow stranger, Daniel's phone did something impossible. 3 weeks after his disappearance, the phone, still secured as evidence, powered on. It didn't make a call. It didn't send a message. It simply activated, screen lighting up for a moment before shutting off again. Battery logs showed no reason for it to do so. No scheduled updates. No external interference detected. But one thing had changed. The navigation app, which had previously ended at the service road, now showed a new endpoint. Not an address, not coordinates, just a blank space. If Daniel's journey had continued somewhere the map could not display. The phone activation changed everything. Until that moment, the case had lived in a gray area. Unusual, unsettling, but still tethered to procedures and analysis. Now, something had acted on its own, without input, without explanation, and without permission. Investigators who had spent weeks arguing over theories suddenly fell silent. There was no precedent for evidence behaving this way. The device was immediately isolated. Engineers placed it inside a Faraday enclosure to block all external signals. Power logs were examined repeatedly. According to the data, the phone should not have turned on. The battery had been stable. No background process was scheduled. No update was pending. And yet it had awakened, if only briefly, long enough to alter one critical detail: the navigation endpoint. Technicians tried to access the destination information directly. There were no coordinates, no address string, no error code. The map simply displayed a path extending beyond the service road, tapering into nothing. The software hadn't crashed. It hadn't malfunctioned. It had recorded something, then failed to represent it. One analyst quietly said it looked like the system had reached a location that didn't exist within its framework. The task force ordered a controlled test. They powered the phone on again under observation. Nothing happened. No flicker. No response. It remained inert, as if the moment had passed and would not repeat itself on command. Meanwhile, surveillance continued at the original site. Motion sensors, thermal cameras, and environmental monitors were installed around the shoulder of the service road. Most nights passed uneventfully, but on the 6th night after the phone incident, several instruments recorded anomalies within the same 5-second window. Temperature dropped slightly. Air pressure fluctuated. A low-frequency vibration registered briefly before disappearing. The readings were small, individually meaningless. Together, they mirrored the moment captured in the warehouse camera footage on the night Daniel vanished. That correlation was enough to justify excavation. Crews arrived early the next morning and began digging at the location where the irregularity had been detected. The desert soil was dry and compacted, resisting the tools at first. As they went deeper, the ground composition changed subtly. Layers that should have been uniform weren't. It was as if the earth had been disturbed and then restored with extreme precision. At 6 feet down, the digging stopped. The crew had uncovered something smooth. Not rock, not metal, not organic. It was a surface that reflected light faintly, but had no discernible texture. Instruments showed no temperature difference between it and the surrounding soil. When touched, it felt solid, but vibrations did not travel through it the way they should have. It absorbed pressure without resistance. Work halted immediately. Specialists were brought in. Samples were taken from the surrounding soil, but not from the surface itself. No one could determine how large it was or how deep it extended. Attempts to scan it failed. Ground-penetrating radar returned nothing, as if the object simply wasn't there. By nightfall, the site was covered and sealed. Armed security was posted. Official reports described the excavation as inconclusive. Internally, however, concern escalated rapidly. That same night, one of the monitoring cameras captured something it was never designed to detect. At 2:17 a.m., a faint distortion appeared in the air above the excavation site. It wasn't light. It wasn't shadow. It was a bending, like heat shimmer, but sharper, more defined. It lasted less than a second. Then it vanished. Seconds later, all sensors spiked simultaneously. And then, miles away, something else happened. Daniel Carter's sister woke abruptly in the middle of the night. She later described the sensation as pressure behind her eyes, followed by an overwhelming certainty that something had changed. She checked her phone. No missed calls. No messages. But when she opened her email, she found something impossible: an unsent draft. It had no subject line, no sender, no timestamp, just text. It read, "I didn't stop. I was pulled." The draft vanished before she could take a screenshot. She reported the incident the next morning, visibly shaken. Investigators confirmed there was no record of the draft on any server. It had never existed in the system. And yet she knew exactly what it said. As the days passed, similar incidents surfaced. A technician reviewing footage swore he heard a voice layered beneath the static for a fraction of a second. A deputy stationed near the site reported a recurring dream in which he stood beside the open car door, unable to move, while something unseen stood just out of view. None of these accounts were included in official records. They were noted privately, quietly, reluctantly. The task force began to fracture. Some members wanted the site permanently sealed and abandoned. Others argued that whatever had happened might happen again, and ignoring it would be irresponsible. The debate ended abruptly when another anomaly occurred. At 4:03 a.m. on a Tuesday, traffic cameras captured a vehicle pulling onto the same service road. Different make, different driver. The car slowed. Hazard lights blinked once. Then the footage skipped. When it resumed, the car was gone. No crashed, no debris, no vehicle exiting the frame. Investigators reached the location within minutes. The road was empty. No driver. No tire marks. No explanation. The pattern was repeating. This time, there was no denial. Whatever had taken Daniel Carter was not an isolated event. It was localized, precise, and active. Internal communications shifted tone. Language changed. Words like incident and anomaly replaced disappearance. Jurisdiction was quietly transferred. Unmarked vehicles appeared at the site. Personnel unfamiliar with local procedures took control. Daniel Carter's name was removed from several databases. His case number was reassigned. Officially, the investigation stalled. Unofficially, it had entered a phase no one was prepared to talk about. And somewhere beyond maps, beyond coordinates, beyond records, something had been opened. Something that now seemed unwilling to close. By the time jurisdiction officially changed hands, the desert no longer felt empty. It felt occupied. The service road was closed under the pretense of structural instability, though no such instability existed on record. Concrete barriers were installed overnight. Warning signs appeared without explanation. Locals were told nothing, and those who asked too many questions were quietly discouraged from returning. The excavation site was sealed beneath reinforced layers of soil and composite material. On paper, it no longer existed. But beneath that surface, whatever had been uncovered remained exactly where it was. Untouched, unmoved, ununderstood. Daniel Carter's case was no longer discussed openly. His disappearance was reclassified, then buried under administrative language so vague it erased meaning entirely. Files were redacted. Evidence was relocated. Personnel were reassigned. The official narrative was simple. There was nothing more to find. Yet the incidents did not stop. 3 weeks after the second vehicle vanished from the service road, a monitoring station nearly 50 miles away recorded a brief anomaly identical to the earlier ones. Temperature fluctuation, pressure drop, a low-frequency hum lasting less than a second. The pattern was unmistakable. Whatever had occurred in the desert was no longer confined to that single location. Analysts began comparing data across states. Quietly, carefully, they found correlations that were never meant to be linked. Remote roads, isolated stops, vehicles pulled over neatly, without damage, drivers gone, cameras functional, evidence absent. Each case dismissed individually, explained away as exposure, misadventure, or voluntary disappearance. Together, they formed something else entirely, a network of moments, a pattern of interruption. Those working closest to the case stopped using words like abduction or phenomenon. Instead, they spoke in abstractions, events, interfaces, transitions. One internal memo described Daniel's disappearance as a point of contact that resulted in displacement. Displacement to where was never specified. The sealed object beneath the desert was monitored continuously. It never emitted light. It never produced measurable sound. But instruments detected subtle fluctuations around it, as if space itself behaved differently in its presence. Attempts to remove soil above it resulted in equipment malfunction. Drones lost signal. Ground sensors failed intermittently. Eventually, all direct interaction was abandoned. Then came the transmission. It arrived without warning, without origin, and without a recognizable medium. A digital packet appeared simultaneously on 3 isolated systems belonging to 3 separate agencies. The content was identical. No header, no metadata, just a sequence of symbols that took analysts hours to interpret. When translated, the message resolved into fragmented text. I am not where I stopped. I am not alone. It does not open twice. The message was traced to no server, no satellite, no known transmission path. It existed briefly, then erased itself from every system at the same moment. Daniel Carter's sister was never informed officially, but she felt the shift. She later said it was like a door closing somewhere she couldn't see. The dream stopped. The pressure vanished. The sense of being watched faded, replaced by something colder. Something final. Months passed. Public attention moved on. New stories replaced old ones. The desert reclaimed the road's edges. Wind erased footprints that never should have been there in the first place. To the outside world, Daniel Carter simply became another missing name among thousands. But inside restricted rooms, the case never closed. 1 year after Daniel vanished, a classified briefing concluded with a recommendation. No further excavation. No further monitoring beyond passive observation. If the phenomenon reoccurred, it was to be documented, not challenged. Containment, not understanding, became the priority. The last slide of the presentation showed a still frame from the warehouse camera footage. The moment Daniel's door opened, the light distortion beside the car, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. A circle marked the space where he should have stepped into view. Beneath the image was a single sentence. Human presence appears to trigger interaction. The implication was clear and deeply unsettling. Whatever existed beneath the desert did not hunt. It did not pursue. It responded. Years later, long after the barriers rusted and the signs were removed, a traveler pulled onto the same stretch of road late at night. Construction had ended. The detour was gone. The service road was open again, unremarkable and quiet. The traveler slowed briefly, feeling an inexplicable sense of pressure, like air compressing around him. His dashboard lights flickered once. Then everything returned to normal. He drove on, unaware of how close he had come to something unseen. Back at home, he later noticed his navigation app had glitched during that moment. The route history showed a gap. Not an error, not a reroute. Just missing distance to as if the road itself had folded inward for an instant. Daniel Carter was never found. No remains. No trace. No location to mark. Officially, he disappeared on a quiet desert road. Unofficially, he crossed a boundary that was never meant to be crossed. And whatever exists beyond that boundary learned something important that night. That people stop when called. And sometimes, they open the door.